I'm 89 years old and losing my mind to dementia. Before I forget everything, I need to tell you about the 47 years I spent hiding a Bigfoot in my barn, and the terrifying message he spent his last years desperately trying to make me understand about humanity. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and tell me where you're watching this story from. I'm 89 years old, and I'm losing my mind. Not figuratively, literally. The doctors call it early-stage Alzheimer's, though there's nothing early about it when you're my age. My nephew Marcus says I have maybe 6 months, maybe a year, before the memories start dissolving like sugar in hot tea. Before I can no longer tell you what happened, what I saw, what I protected for 47 years. So I'm telling you now while I still can, while the words still connect to the images in my head, while I can still remember his face. My name is Margaret Eleanor Whitmore. For 47 years, I kept the biggest secret in the world. From October 12, 1978, until February 28, 2025, I was the guardian of something impossible. Something that changed everything I understood about consciousness, about what it means to be a person, about humanity itself. His name was Walker. At least that's what I called him. And he was a Sasquatch, a Bigfoot if you prefer the sensational term. But those words don't capture what he really was. He was my friend, my family. My witness to a life I chose to live in secret, because some truths are too dangerous to expose. This is the story of how a biologist who believed only in measurable, peer-reviewed facts became the protector of a myth. How I went from grieving widow to guardian of something that shouldn't exist. And why, after nearly 5 decades of silence, I'm finally breaking that silence before dementia steals the story forever. I tell you this from a small room in Evergreen Care Facility in Deep Creek, Washington. Through my window, I can see the Cascade Mountains where it all happened, where he lived, where he died. On my lap sits a worn leather notebook filled with 387 drawings. His drawings, his words in a language that took us decades to develop. In my dresser drawer are Polaroid photographs too blurred to prove anything to anyone but me. And in my failing memory are 47 years of moments that defined my life more than my marriage, my career, or my own daughter ever did. Some might call me crazy. The dementia diagnosis will make it easy to dismiss everything I say as the ravings of a deteriorating mind. But Marcus has the medical records, the tissue samples, the documentation that proves I'm not making this up. I'm telling this story now because Walker spent his last years trying desperately to communicate something to me. Something about humanity. Something that terrified him so much he drew it over and over with shaking hands until he could barely hold the charcoal. And I think, God help me, I think I finally understand what he was trying to say. October 12, 1978. Carter was president. Grease was still playing in theaters. The only technology I owned was a transistor radio and a Polaroid SX70 camera. I was 42 years old, living alone in a cabin 47 kilometers from the nearest town. Deep Creek, Washington, population 482. The cabin sat on 85 hectares of dense forest that my husband John had bought in 1970 with dreams of building a retirement sanctuary. Those dreams ended on a rocky cliff face in 1976 when his climbing rope failed. The property was accessible only by a dirt road that became impassable from November through March. No electricity beyond what my diesel generator could provide. No phone line. My only regular contact with the outside world was a monthly supply run to Deep Creek and occasional letters from my daughter Sarah in Boston. Letters that came less and less frequently as the years went by. I was a field biologist, specializing in fungal taxonomy. Mushrooms, molds, lichens. The organisms most people found boring or disgusting were my life's work. The University of Washington paid me a small stipend to catalog species in the Cascade Wilderness, sending me sample kits and receiving back my meticulously documented findings. It was perfect work for someone who wanted to be alone. I was deeply, crushingly lonely. But I preferred loneliness to the alternative, pretending to be fine, Pretending John's death hadn't broken something fundamental in me. Pretending I could have normal conversations about weather and politics when all I really wanted was silence. The cabin was small, one bedroom, a main room with a wood stove, a kitchen area with a hand pump for water. Behind it stood a weathered barn that John had used for storage. The forest pressed in from all sides, Douglas firs that stretched up like cathedral columns, western hemlocks draped in moss, the constant sound of Deep Creek running cold and fast over smooth stones, about 300 meters from the front door. That October evening, I was sitting at my kitchen table organizing field notes. The radio was playing something by Fleetwood Mac. Dreams, I think, though memory isn't what it used to be. I had a cup of tea cooling beside my elbow and a kerosene lamp casting shadows across my handwriting. That's when I noticed it. The silence. Complete, absolute silence. No crickets, no owls, not even the rustling of small mammals through the underbrush. The kind of silence that meant a predator was near, a cougar maybe, or a bear. I stood up, grabbed my flashlight, and stepped out onto the porch. The October air was cold enough to see my breath. The moon was nearly full, painting silver highlights on the fog that rolled through the trees like slow-motion surf. And then I heard it. A sound unlike anything I'd encountered in 6 years of living in these woods. Low, guttural, resonant. Not quite a moan, not quite a growl. Something in between that made the hair on my neck stand up. My biologist's training kicked in. Large mammal in distress. Probably injured. I grabbed my larger flashlight, pulled on my jacket, and headed toward the sound. I followed it for maybe 300 meters, my boots crunching on fallen pine needles, my breath coming in visible puffs. The beam of my flashlight cut through the fog, illuminating tree trunks thick with moss and ferns as tall as my waist. That's when I saw it. At first, my brain tried to rationalize. Bear. It's a bear, caught in something. That's why the shape is wrong. But as I got closer, pushing through a tangle of salal and Oregon grape, rationalization became impossible. It was lying on its side in a small clearing, and it was massive. Even prone and curled in pain, it was easily 7.5, maybe 8 feet tall, covered in reddish-brown hair that looked wet, not from rain, but from blood. So much blood. The arms were too long, the shoulders too broad. The hands, God, the hands were the size of dinner plates with 5 thick fingers that clutched at the forest floor. And the face. The face destroyed every certainty I'd ever had about the natural world. Almost human. Heavy brow ridge, broad flat nose. Lips more pronounced than any ape's. But the eyes were what stopped me cold, made my flashlight beam waver as my hand started shaking. Dark, intelligent, fixed on me with an awareness that wasn't animal curiosity. It was person recognition, fear, understanding, a Sasquatch, a Bigfoot, the creature that serious scientists dismissed as folklore and hoax. Lying in front of me, dying, looking at me with eyes that pleaded and calculated simultaneously. My first instinct was pure scientific excitement. This is the discovery of the century. This is Nobel Prize territory. I need to document this, call someone, get help. Then I saw the trap, an old-style bear trap, the kind that had been illegal for decades, rusted iron jaws clamped around the creature's left leg. The teeth had gone deep. I could see white bone through torn flesh, see infection spreading in dark purple streaks up the massive thigh. Blood pooled beneath, almost black in my flashlight beam. The creature made that sound again, softer, directly at me. And I understood with a clarity that transcended language what it was asking. Help, please, help me. But there was something else in those eyes. Terror, not of the pain or death, terror of what I would do. Of what humans would do if they found it alive. I stood there in that clearing, fog swirling around my legs, flashlight beam steady on a creature that couldn't exist, and faced a choice that would define the rest of my life. If I called for help, rangers, scientists, authorities, I'd be part of the greatest zoological discovery in modern history. Papers published, fame, recognition, vindication of every indigenous legend ever dismissed. I'd also be condemning a conscious being to become a specimen, a thing to be studied, displayed, dissected. I'd seen what happened to rare animals brought into facilities. I'd seen the cages, the tests, the complete destruction of autonomy in the name of scientific understanding. Looking into those eyes, I knew, with the kind of certainty that bypasses logic, that this wasn't just an unknown primate. This was someone. Different from me, yes, but someone with thoughts, memories, the capacity to understand what captivity would mean. Okay, I heard myself say, my voice shaking. Okay, I'm going to help you, but you have to trust me. The creature's eyes tracked me as I turned and ran back to the cabin, my scientific training warring with something more primal, compassion that recognized personhood regardless of species. I grabbed my veterinary first aid kit, supplies I kept for treating injured wildlife. Antibiotics, gauze, sutures, morphine sulfate that I'd requisitioned for emergencies, a bottle of whiskey from under the sink, clean towels, my largest blanket. When I returned, the creature was still there, still conscious, still watching. I knelt beside it slowly, keeping my movements visible and calm. "This is going to hurt," I said softly, unscrewing the whiskey bottle. "I need to clean the wound before I can do anything else." I poured whiskey over my hands, over the trap mechanism. The creature tensed, made a sound deep in its throat. Not aggressive, but bracing for pain. The trap was old, spring-loaded, designed to hold without killing. Someone had set it intentionally, knowing what they were hunting. That realization made my hands shake with anger as I worked the release mechanism. It took me 40 minutes to get the jaws open. The creature made sounds, low, rhythmic vocalizations that might have been their equivalent of controlled breathing, managing pain. It didn't try to attack me, didn't pull away. It seemed to understand I was trying to help. When the trap finally released, the creature let out a sound that echoed through the forest, part roar, part sob. I saw tears, actual tears rolling from those intelligent eyes. The wound was terrible. Deep lacerations, crushed muscle, possible fracture of the tibia, infection spreading fast through tissue that looked simultaneously familiar and alien under my flashlight beam. I worked for the next 2 hours, cleaning, irrigating with sterile saline, carefully removing debris. The creature lay still, occasionally making soft sounds, eyes never leaving my face. I gave it morphine, estimated dosage based on body weight, praying I wasn't overdosing, and watched it relax slightly as the medication took effect. By the time I finished suturing and wrapping the leg, dawn was breaking through the trees. The creature was exhausted but conscious. I sat back on my heels, covered in blood and mud, and looked at what I'd done. "You can't stay here," I said aloud, more to organize my own thoughts than because I expected understanding. "If those trappers come back, if anyone finds you—" The creature shifted slightly, tried to put weight on the injured leg, collapsed immediately with a sound of frustration and pain. I made a decision that would isolate me from the world for the next 47 years. "The barn," I said. "I can hide you in the barn. It's old, solid. No one ever goes there. You'll be safe while you heal." The creature looked at me. And then, I swear this happened, swear it on everything I've ever held sacred. It nodded. One deliberate movement of that massive head. Understanding. Agreement. It took us 4 hours to make that 300-meter journey. The creature using me as a crutch, leaning its enormous weight against my frame while hopping on the good leg. We had to stop every few meters, both of us breathing hard, both of us committed to something neither fully understood yet. By the time we reached the barn, the October sun was high and cold. I'd cleared out a corner, piled it with every blanket and tarp I owned, created a nest of sorts. The creature collapsed into it, exhausted beyond measure. I brought water in a bucket. The creature drank deeply, hands, not paws, cupped carefully around the bucket's edge. "Stay quiet," I said, knowing I was probably talking to myself. "I'll bring food, I'll take care of you. But you have to stay hidden. Do you understand?" The creature looked at me, touched its chest with one massive finger, then pointed at me. A question. A profound question about connection and trust. I touched my chest. "Margaret," I said. "My name is Margaret." The creature's mouth moved, trying to form the sound. Nothing came out that resembled speech. But it made a different sound, 2 soft grunts, and touched its chest again. It was giving me permission to name it, or perhaps telling me it already had a name I couldn't pronounce. I thought of how it had moved through the forest, even injured. That distinctive gait, the way it navigated terrain. "Walker," I said, "I'll call you Walker." The creature made that soft grunt again, and I chose to believe it was acceptance. That was October 12, 1978. The day I stopped being just Margaret Whitmore, biologist. The day I became guardian of an impossible secret. What I didn't know then, couldn't know, was that this decision would cost me my daughter, my career, my connection to human society. That I would spend the next 47 years lying to everyone, hiding everything, living a double life that would leave me finally, profoundly alone. But I also didn't know that those 47 years would contain the purest friendship I'd ever experience. That Walker would teach me things about consciousness and connection that no peer-reviewed paper could capture. That loving something the world insisted didn't exist would give my life a meaning I'd lost when John died. If I'd known all of that in that moment, standing in the barn watching Walker settle into the blankets, would I have made the same choice? Yes, without hesitation, every single time. The first 6 weeks were the hardest. Walker's leg infection fought back against every antibiotic I had. I made 3 emergency trips to Deep Creek, buying veterinary supplies from different stores, inventing stories about injured livestock that I didn't own. The clerk at Cascade Feed and Supply, a kid maybe 19 with feathered hair like Leif Garrett, sold me bottles of penicillin while humming along to Le Freak on the store radio. "You getting into ranching, Mrs. Whitmore?" he asked, ringing up enough medication to treat a horse. "Just preparing for winter," I lied, the first of thousands of lies I would tell. "Weather's supposed to be bad. Want to have supplies on hand." Walker's wound required cleaning twice daily. I'd enter the barn at dawn and dusk, carrying supplies and food, always announcing myself before opening the door. Walker learned quickly to recognize my footsteps, would make a soft vocalization, a low rumble that I came to understand as acknowledgement, maybe even greeting. The infection peaked around day 12. Walker's fever spiked to what must have been 104, 105 degrees. His breathing became labored, shallow. I spent that entire night in the barn, changing cold compresses, administering antipyretics, talking to him, even though I had no idea if words meant anything. "You have to fight this," I told him, my voice hoarse with exhaustion and fear. "I didn't drag you 300 meters just to lose you now. You have to fight." Walker's eyes opened briefly, unfocused with fever, but his hand, so large it could crush my skull, reached out and touched my arm with gentleness that made my throat tight. The fever broke at dawn. Walker slept for 18 hours straight, and when he woke, the infection had visibly receded. The purple streaks were fading. The wound, while still severe, was starting to show signs of healing. We celebrated with fresh blackberries I'd picked from the forest edge. Walker ate them one at a time, examining each berry with what seemed like wonder before placing it carefully in his mouth. When he finished, he picked up a smooth river stone from the barn floor and offered it to me with both hands. A gift. A thank you. I accepted it, felt its weight in my palm, warm from being held, perfectly smooth. I still have that stone. It's in my nightstand drawer, wrapped in cloth, one of the few physical proofs that any of this was real. Communication developed slowly, in layers. Walker couldn't speak. His vocal anatomy wasn't shaped for human phonemes, but he could vocalize. Different sounds for different meanings. A soft grunt for yes. A sharper sound, almost a bark, for no. A rumble of contentment. A keen of distress. I learned them the way you learn a new language, through immersion and necessity. But it was the drawings that changed everything. One afternoon, about 3 weeks after that first night, I brought Walker a piece of charcoal and some paper I'd salvaged from old supply boxes. I drew a simple stick figure to represent myself, then handed him the charcoal. Walker held it carefully, his enormous fingers managing to grip it with surprising delicacy. He looked at the paper, then at me, then back at the paper, and he began to draw. Not stick figures, real drawings. A human form, recognizably me with my short hair and jacket, then himself, larger, proportioned correctly, detailed, then a tree between us. I stared at the drawing, my heart pounding. This wasn't simple mimicry. This was symbolic representation, abstract thought, the ability to conceptualize relationships spatially. "Oh my God," I whispered. "You're not just intelligent, you're cognitively sophisticated." Walker tilted his head, watching my reaction. Then he drew something else. A question mark, not in the mathematical symbol, but in the shape of his body language. He pointed at the drawing of me, then at himself, then made a gesture with his hands, moving them together. Together. He was asking if we were together now, if I was staying. I touched the drawing of myself, then the drawing of him. "Yes," I said. "Together. I'm not leaving you." Walker made that soft rumbling sound again, and I realized with sudden clarity that I wasn't just hiding an unknown animal. I was forming a relationship with another person, one who happened to be of a different species, but a person nonetheless, with thoughts, emotions, the capacity for symbolic communication. That realization should have excited the scientist in me. Instead, it terrified me, because persons deserve autonomy, and I was keeping Walker confined to a barn because the alternative was turning him over to people who would treat him as a specimen, not a someone. The moral weight of that choice would haunt me for decades. December 18th, 1978. Snow had been falling for 3 days, turning the forest into a monochrome landscape. I was in the cabin, trying to write my monthly report to the university, when I heard vehicles approaching. My heart stopped. No one came here in December. The road was barely passable even with four-wheel drive. I looked out the window to see 2 trucks, a sheriff's vehicle and a civilian pickup, pulling into the clearing in front of the cabin. 3 men got out, all wearing heavy coats and carrying rifles. I stepped onto the porch, trying to keep my voice steady. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" The sheriff, a man named Haroldson, who I'd met maybe twice in town, approached with what I assumed was meant to be a friendly smile. "Afternoon, Mrs. Whitmore. Sorry to bother you out here, especially in this weather. What's this about? We're tracking something. Got reports of unusual activity in this area. Damaged traps, strange sounds, tracks that don't match any known animal." He gestured toward the woods behind my cabin. "Your property sits right in the middle of the search area. Mind if we look around?" Every instinct screamed danger. "What kind of tracks?" One of the other men stepped forward, mid-30s, expensive outdoor gear, eyes bright with something that looked like excitement. "Large bipedal tracks. Very large. You heard anything unusual? Seen anything strange?" I forced myself to appear confused, concerned. "Just the normal forest sounds. Owls, elk. Nothing unusual. What exactly are you looking for?" "Nothing to worry about, ma'am," the sheriff said smoothly. "Probably just a bear walking on hind legs, but some folks got excited. Think it might be one of those Bigfoot things." He laughed, but it sounded forced. The excited man didn't laugh. "We set specialized traps, expensive equipment. Something triggered one about 6 weeks ago. Broke right through a tempered steel chain. We've been tracking it since." My blood ran cold. Walker's trap. They'd been hunting him specifically. "Well, I haven't seen any giant apes," I said, keeping my tone light. "And I'd appreciate if you didn't set traps on my property. I don't want my generator shed or barn damaged." "Your barn," the excited man said. "Mind if we check inside? Just to be thorough." Every cell in my body screamed no, but refusing would raise suspicion. I needed to appear cooperative, unconcerned. "The barn's locked," I said, "and honestly, it's just storage. Old furniture, supplies, nothing interesting. Won't take but a minute, the sheriff said, already moving in that direction. I had no choice but to follow, my mind racing. Walker was in there. Had to be. But we'd discussed this scenario. Well, discussed, through drawings and gestures. I'd drawn pictures of men with guns approaching, made it clear he needed to hide if he ever heard vehicles. Please, I thought desperately, please have understood. The barn door was secured with a padlock. I fumbled with the key, buying seconds, then swung it open. The interior was dim, dusty, old furniture covered with tarps. Boxes stacked against walls. The pile of blankets where Walker usually rested. Empty. The men moved through the space, checking corners, lifting tarps. The excited man examined the floor, looking for tracks. I held my breath, trying not to look at the cellar door, barely visible beneath a stack of crates, where Walker and I had created a hiding space weeks earlier. Nothing here, the sheriff said after several minutes. Sorry to waste your time, Mrs. Whitmore. Is there anything else? I asked, voice tight. Just keep an eye out, and Mrs. Whitmore? The sheriff's expression grew more serious. If you do see anything unusual, call us immediately. Whatever this is, it could be dangerous. Some folks are offering serious money for proof or capture. Rather have professionals handle it than some yahoo with a rifle causing problems. They left as the winter sun started to set. I watched their trucks disappear down the road before returning to the barn, my legs shaking so badly I could barely walk. Walker, I called softly. They're gone. A scraping sound from beneath the floor. The cellar door shifted, moved aside. Walker's face appeared, eyes wide with fear that slowly shifted to relief when he saw me alone. He'd understood. He'd hidden. He'd stayed perfectly silent while strangers searched for him. That night I sat with Walker in the barn, both of us processing how close we'd come to catastrophe. Walker drew picture after picture, men with guns, cages, buildings with windows that looked like cells. He was showing me what he feared, what he knew happened to creatures like him. And I understood something crucial. Walker wasn't hiding from humanity out of shyness or animal instinct. He was hiding because he knew, through experience or passed down knowledge, exactly what humans did to things they didn't understand. From that moment on, I became truly committed to keeping him secret. Not just until he healed. Forever. The barn needed fortifications. I spent the rest of that winter reinforcing locks, installing heavy curtains over the high windows, creating multiple hiding spots. I bought supplies in 3 different towns to avoid raising suspicion about quantities. I told anyone who asked that I was finally organizing John's things, doing winter projects, keeping busy. All lies. My life became an architecture of deception, and I accepted it because the alternative was unthinkable. Walker's leg healed over the next months, though he never lost a slight limp. A permanent reminder of that October night. By March 1979, he could walk unassisted, could move through the barn with surprising grace despite his size. But he couldn't leave. Not safely. And we both knew it. One evening in early April, Walker drew something that broke my heart. A figure like himself, but smaller, standing beside him. Then more figures. A group. Family. He pointed at the drawing, then at himself alone, then out toward the mountains. You had a family, I said softly. You missed them. Walker made a sound I'd never heard before. Low, mournful, sustained. The sound of grief that transcends species. I sat beside him, my hand on his massive arm. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry you're alone. He touched my face gently with one finger, the way you might touch something fragile and precious. Then he drew 2 figures together, him and me, and touched his chest over his heart. Family, he was saying. Your family now. I cried that night for the first time since John's death. Not from sadness, but from the profound recognition that I'd been given something precious. Connection with a being who could have hated humans, who had every reason to, but who chose instead to see me as an individual, who chose to trust. It was humbling and terrifying in equal measure. The years between 1980 and 2000 blurred together into a routine that felt both comfortable and claustrophobic. Walker's world shrank to the barn, the cellar, and on rare moonless nights when I was absolutely certain we were alone, brief excursions into the forest behind the property, always staying close, always vigilant. I documented everything in notebooks. Not for science, I'd abandoned any thought of publication, but because Walker seemed to want his existence recorded. He would bring me drawings to keep, arrange them in specific orders, make it clear through gestures that this was important, that someone should know. Our communication system became increasingly sophisticated. I brought him books with pictures, field guides, anatomy texts, National Geographic magazines. Walker would study them for hours, then draw his own versions, pointing out similarities and differences between human anatomy and his own. He was particularly fascinated by images of other primates, gorillas, chimpanzees, orangutans. He'd draw them, then himself, then make gestures that seemed to indicate relationship but also difference. He was trying to tell me something about his evolutionary history, his place in the great tree of life. One memorable afternoon in 1984, I brought him a magazine article about Jane Goodall's work with chimpanzees. Walker studied the photos intently, then drew something extraordinary, a branching tree with different limbs for different species. He placed chimpanzees on one branch, humans on another, and himself on a third branch that split off closer to the human line but went its own direction. Parallel evolution, I breathed, understanding. You're saying you're not descended from modern apes, but from an earlier ancestor that split off separately. That you and humans are more like cousins than like different species of the same genus. Walker made that soft affirmative sound, clearly pleased I'd understood. Then he drew something that made me pause, a timeline with many more figures like himself in the past, fewer in the present, a population graph showing decline over time. You're endangered, I said, maybe critically endangered. That's why you're so isolated. He nodded, then drew something that chilled me. Human figures with guns and cages, closing in on the small remaining population of his kind. Walker wasn't just showing me biological facts. He was showing me a species facing extinction, hunted deliberately by humans who wanted proof, wanted specimens, wanted to own what they discovered. Reagan was president now. MTV had launched, filling my small TV. I'd bought a generator-powered set in 1982, with music videos that fascinated Walker. He particularly loved anything with dancing, would watch with intense focus as humans moved to rhythm. One night, feeling ridiculous but compelled by Walker's obvious interest, I put on Billie Jean and showed him some basic dance moves. Walker watched, then tried to mimic them, his massive body moving with surprising coordination. We danced in the barn by lantern light, Michael Jackson's voice echoing off the rafters, and I laughed for the first time in years. Really laughed. Walker made that rumbling sound, his version of laughter I'd come to understand, and bowed dramatically. Where he'd learned that gesture, I had no idea, but it was perfectly executed and perfectly timed for comic effect. These moments of lightness were precious, necessary counterweights to the constant weight of secrecy. But the threats never stopped. In 1985, a helicopter, military from the markings, flew over the property 3 times in 1 week, low enough that I could see people with cameras. Walker and I spent those days in the cellar, me holding a finger to my lips, him understanding that absolute silence was required. In 1991, as the first Gulf War dominated news cycles, a group calling themselves the North American Cryptid Research Foundation set up camp less than 2 kilometers away. I could hear their generators at night, see their lights through the trees. They stayed for 11 days, and Walker didn't make a sound the entire time. The stress was aging me visibly. At 55, I looked 70. Gray hair, deep lines around my eyes, a permanent tension in my shoulders that never released. My daughter Sarah called once that year, the first contact in months. "Mom, you sound terrible. Are you okay?" "I'm fine, sweetie, just busy with work." "You're always busy with work. When was the last time you left that cabin? When was the last time you saw another human being?" I see people in town. Once a month to buy supplies doesn't count. Mom, I'm worried about you. This isolation isn't healthy. You need to see someone, talk to someone. I talk to people plenty. A long silence. Then, Dad died 5 years ago. You can't keep grieving forever. You have to live. I wanted to tell her I wasn't grieving anymore, that I'd found purpose, meaning, connection that sustained me more than any human relationship ever had. But how could I explain that the most important relationship in my life was with someone the world insisted didn't exist? I'm doing what I need to do, I said finally. Please don't worry about me. Sarah didn't call again for 3 years. When she did, it was to tell me she was engaged, and no, she didn't expect me to come to Boston for the wedding because she knew I wouldn't leave the cabin. She was right. I didn't go. Couldn't go. Walker had developed a respiratory infection that required constant monitoring. I chose him over her, and she never forgave me. Some sacrifices cut deeper than others. In 1997, I made the hardest decision of my life. I told Marcus. Dr. Marcus Chen was my nephew, my sister's son, 34 years old and a veterinarian specializing in exotic animals. He'd taken a position at Seattle's Woodland Park Zoo and had started visiting me occasionally, worried about his eccentric aunt living alone in the mountains. Marcus was brilliant, kind, and observant. Too observant. He'd noticed the medical supplies I kept forgetting to explain. The amount of food I bought for supposedly just myself. The fact that the barn was always locked and I never ever let him enter it. "Aunt Margaret," he said one afternoon in June, sitting at my kitchen table with coffee cooling in his cup. "I know something's going on. You're not just a reclusive widow cataloging mushrooms. You're hiding something." My stomach dropped. "I don't know what you mean. The medical supplies, the fresh produce you buy but I never see you eat. The fact that you've lost weight while claiming to be fine." He leaned forward. "I'm not here to judge. I'm here to help. Whatever it is, illegal cultivation, harboring someone, I don't care. But you look exhausted, and I think you need support." I looked at this young man I'd known since he was a baby, who'd grown into someone with compassion and integrity, and made a choice born of desperation. Walker had developed what I feared was pneumonia, and my veterinary knowledge was reaching its limits. "If I show you," I said slowly, "you can never tell anyone. Not your mother, not your colleagues, not anyone. Ever. Do you understand? Aunt Margaret, promise me, Marcus, on everything you hold sacred, promise me." Something in my tone must have conveyed the gravity. "I promise. Whatever it is, I promise." I stood up. "Follow me. And Marcus, don't scream, don't run. Just trust that I know what I'm doing." We walked to the barn. I unlocked the door, my hands shaking. Inside, Walker was lying on his bed of blankets, breathing labored, fur matted with fever sweat. He looked up as we entered, saw Marcus. Tensed, starting to rise despite obvious weakness. "Walker, it's okay," I said quickly. "This is Marcus, he's family, he's going to help you." Marcus had gone absolutely still, his face drained of color. He was staring at Walker with an expression I couldn't quite read. Shock, yes, but also wonder and growing comprehension. He whispered, "That's a Sasquatch, a real Sasquatch." "His name is Walker," I said quietly. "I found him 19 years ago. He's dying, Marcus. I think it's pneumonia, and I don't know how to help him." To his eternal credit, Marcus didn't run, didn't deny what he was seeing. His training took over, and he stepped closer, moving slowly, hands visible. "Hey there," he said softly. "I'm a doctor. Well, a veterinarian. Your aunt brought me to help. May I examine you?" Walker looked at me. I nodded, making calming gestures. Marcus spent the next hour conducting a thorough examination, using equipment he had to retrieve from his car. Walker tolerated it with what seemed like understanding that this was necessary. "Bacterial pneumonia," Marcus said finally. "Severe, but treatable with the right antibiotics. Aunt Margaret, you probably saved his life bringing me here. Another day or two and—" He broke off, looking between me and Walker. How long has he been here? Since 1978, October. Jesus Christ. Marcus sat down heavily on an overturned crate. You've been hiding a living Sasquatch for 19 years. Do you understand what this means? This is the most important zoological discovery in history. This is a person, I interrupted firmly. Not a discovery, not a specimen. A person who deserves dignity and privacy and safety from people who would treat him like a carnival attraction. Marcus looked at Walker, who was watching our exchange with clear attention. Can he understand us? Every word, I think. His vocal anatomy can't produce human speech, but his comprehension is sophisticated. Walker, can you show Marcus your drawings? Walker reached slowly for the notebook I kept in the barn, opened it to show pages of detailed anatomical sketches, maps, symbolic representations. Marcus studied them, his expression shifting from shock to awe. This is abstract reasoning, symbolic communication, cognitive complexity comparable to humans. He's not comparable, I said. He is. Different body, different species, but equal mind, equal personhood. Marcus looked at me, and I saw the moment he truly understood. That's why you've hidden him. Because if anyone found out, they'd take him, study him, cage him. He'd spend whatever time he had left as an object of scientific curiosity, not as the thinking, feeling, conscious being he is. We talked for hours that night, Marcus absorbing the magnitude of what he'd learned. He came back twice a week for the next month, treating Walker's pneumonia, bringing proper medical equipment, becoming part of the circle of trust that had been just me for so long. Having Marcus know was both relief and new anxiety. Another person to trust, another potential point of failure. But it also meant I wasn't alone in this anymore, and that mattered more than I could express. Walker recovered fully, and Marcus became his regular doctor, making visits every few weeks to check on chronic health issues, arthritis in that old injury, gradually failing eyesight, the inevitable deterioration of aging. Because Walker was aging. By 2000, his fur was more gray than brown, his movement slower. And I was aging too, approaching 64 with all the physical limitations that entailed. What happens when you can't do this anymore? Marcus asked one evening in 2001, after examining both me and Walker. Aunt Margaret, you're developing heart issues. Your blood pressure is dangerous, and Walker's geriatric. He needs more care than one person can provide. What choice do I have? Tell someone, document everything, let the world know. And condemn him to spend his last years in captivity? Never. Then what's your plan? You die, Walker dies alone, and everything you've witnessed disappears with you. I didn't have an answer. Not then. The breaking point came in March 2003. I was 66 years old. Walker was, I estimated, in his mid to late 60s, equivalent to human age. We were both feeling our years keenly, both moving slower, both requiring more help with daily tasks. It was a cold Tuesday morning when I found him collapsed on the barn floor. One entire side of his body was limp, unresponsive. His eyes were open but confused, pupils different sizes, drool running from the corner of his mouth. Stroke. Massive stroke. I called Marcus immediately, sobbing into the phone. He's dying. Oh God, Marcus, he's dying. Marcus arrived within 2 hours, speeding up the mountain road in violation of every traffic law. He confirmed the diagnosis immediately. It's bad, he said quietly, checking vitals. The right side is completely paralyzed. He's semi-conscious at best. Aunt Margaret, I don't know if he's going to wake up from this. For 9 days, Walker existed in a twilight state. Sometimes he'd surface to consciousness, his left hand grasping mine with desperate strength. Other times he'd sink back into whatever darkness the stroke had created. I slept in the barn, on the floor beside him. Marcus brought equipment, started an IV, did everything possible. But we both knew we were fighting a losing battle. On the 7th day, during one of his lucid moments, Walker did something extraordinary. With his functioning left hand, he grabbed charcoal and drew with frantic urgency. Not the simple communication drawings we'd developed. Something different, something that looked almost like a warning. He drew human figures with weapons, drew forests burning, drew more creatures like himself being hunted, killed, disappearing. Then he drew something that I still don't fully understand, a symbol that looked like an eye, surrounded by marks that might have been rays or flames or something else entirely. He drew that symbol over and over, his hand shaking with effort, making urgent sounds as if trying desperately to communicate something crucial before time ran out. "What is it?" I asked, crying. "Walker, what are you trying to tell me?" He pointed to the symbol, then to himself, then to me. Touched his head as if indicating memory or mind, then made a gesture I interpreted as remember, or preserve, or maybe warn. Whatever he was trying to tell me, it was important, more important than anything else, and I was too stupid, too human to understand. Walker survived the stroke, but he was never the same. The right side remained partially paralyzed, requiring help to walk, to eat, to do basic tasks. And worse, his mind started to fade. By 2005, he'd forgotten most of our communication system. By 2010, he sometimes didn't recognize me at first, would look at me with confusion before recognition slowly returned. By 2020, he was spending most days in a fog, occasionally surfacing to the Walker I knew, but more often existing in some distant space where I couldn't reach him. Watching someone you love lose themselves to dementia is devastating regardless of species. I grieved his fading even as I cared for him, watching the brilliant mind I'd known deteriorate into fragments and shadows. But even in his decline, he remembered the drawings, would sometimes find the charcoal, draw that symbol with shaking hands, look at me with eyes that briefly cleared as if saying, "This matters, please understand this." I kept every drawing, cataloged them, numbered them, preserved them. 387 drawings total, spanning from 1978 to 2024. A visual record of a mind, a consciousness, a person who existed despite the world's refusal to acknowledge the possibility. Marcus and I discussed what to do countless times. Walker couldn't survive much longer. Neither could I. My own heart was failing, diagnosed with congestive heart failure in 2018. We were two elderly beings, both declining, both approaching the end. "We need to document everything," Marcus insisted. "Medical records, tissue samples, DNA analysis. When he passes, we need proof." "DNA analysis, Marcus, you can't. Private lab, completely confidential. But Aunt Margaret, if Walker is the last of his kind, if there are no others left, then the least we can do is preserve scientific evidence of his existence, not for fame, for truth." I agreed reluctantly. Marcus collected samples over the next years, sent them to contacts he trusted absolutely, received back results that confirmed what we'd known. Walker wasn't any known primate species. Genetically distinct, positioned somewhere between great apes and humans, carrying markers that suggested an ancient divergence. He was, in every measurable way, proof that human evolution was more complex than we'd thought, that other branches existed, survived, lived in the shadows while we claimed the world, and we were watching that branch end. February 28th, 2025, the day Walker died. I woke that morning with a feeling I can only describe as knowing. The way you know sometimes that something significant is ending. I went to the barn, found Walker lying on his blankets, breathing shallow, eyes partly open but unfocused. He was 47 years past that October night when I'd found him in the trap. I was 89, having outlived my husband, outlived my relationship with my daughter, outlived most everyone I'd known in 1978. But Walker and I had outlived it all together. I sat beside him, took his massive hand in both of mine. It was cold. The strength that had once been so formidable now faded to almost nothing. "Hey there," I whispered. "It's okay. You can rest now. You've fought long enough." Walker's eyes found mine, briefly focused. He made a soft sound, the greeting rumble I'd heard thousands of times over nearly 5 decades. "I'm here," I said. "I'm right here. You're not alone. His left hand, the one that still had some function, moved slightly, touching my face with a gentleness that broke my heart. Then he touched his own chest over his heart, then mine, family, love, connection that transcended every boundary we'd crossed. Yes, I said, crying openly now. Family. Always family. He touched his forehead, then mine. Remember. I'll remember. I promise. Every moment. Every drawing. Everything you tried to tell me. I'll remember. Walker made one more sound, softer than anything I'd heard before. Then his breathing changed, became slower, more shallow. I felt his hand relax in mine. And then gently, quietly, like the last light of day fading into night, he was gone. I sat with him for hours, crying, talking to him, thanking him for 47 years of friendship and purpose and teaching me that consciousness isn't limited to my species, that personhood can take forms we're too arrogant to recognize. Marcus came that evening. Together, we cremated Walker's body in a pyre built deep in the forest, in a clearing he'd always liked, surrounded by old-growth firs and the sound of the creek running cold over stones. We scattered his ashes in places he'd drawn as important over the years. Mountain peaks, hidden caves, the bank of Deep Creek where he'd sometimes washed on those rare nights we could risk going outside. I kept a small portion of his ashes in a cedar box. I kept his drawings. I kept the memories that were starting, even then, to fray at the edges as my own mind began the slow dissolution of dementia. 8 months later, I'm sitting in Evergreen Care Facility, writing this down before I forget how to write, recording it before I forget what happened. Marcus has the documentation, the medical records, the DNA analysis, but these words are mine, and Walker's story deserves to be told by someone who knew him, not just examined him. What did I learn in 47 years? That consciousness isn't exclusive to humans, that it can exist in forms we're too limited to recognize until forced to confront it directly, that protecting the vulnerable, even when it costs you everything, is the most noble purpose a life can serve. That loneliness chosen from love is fundamentally different from loneliness imposed by loss. But I learned something else, something that Walker tried desperately to communicate in his final years, something that terrifies me even now. Walker had been watching humans for decades before I found him, maybe his whole life. Maybe his ancestors had been watching us for generations. And what he saw, what he tried so hard to show me in those frantic drawings, was a species that destroys what it doesn't understand, that treats the world as something to dominate rather than coexist with, that would rather capture and cage than simply let be. That symbol he drew obsessively, I finally understood it about 3 months ago, looking through old National Geographic magazines. It's similar to symbols found in indigenous art across the Pacific Northwest, representations of watchers or observers, beings in the forest who witness but don't intervene. Walker wasn't just hiding from humans because we're dangerous. He was observing us, recording, through whatever means his kind had, the behavior of a species that claimed intelligence while demonstrating such profound destructiveness. We're being watched, judged, found wanting. And the fact that beings like Walker choose to remain hidden rather than make contact tells you everything you need to know about what they've seen in us. If there are others, and I hope desperately there are, that Walker wasn't truly the last. They're out there right now, watching as we destroy forests, hunt species to extinction, ignore every warning sign that we're destroying the only home we have. And they've chosen to remain invisible because they've watched us long enough to know exactly what we'd do to them if we found them. That's the terrifying truth Walker tried to communicate. Not just, I'm afraid of you, but I've been watching you, and you should be afraid of what you've become. So why am I telling this story now, knowing it will be dismissed as the ravings of a demented old woman? Because Walker asked me to remember, because his life mattered. Because somewhere in those mountains there might be others like him, and they deserve to know that at least one human tried to do better. And because maybe, just maybe, If we understand that we're being watched by witnesses who stay hidden out of justified fear, we might finally look at ourselves honestly and change. I'm 89 years old. My memory is failing. Soon I won't remember Walker's face, won't remember the sound of his greeting rumble, won't remember the feeling of his gentle touch on my face that last morning. But I'll have these words, these drawings, this testimony. Walker existed. He was real. He was a person with thoughts and emotions and the capacity for love that transcended the boundaries of species. He was my friend, my family, my greatest teacher. And he spent his last years trying desperately to warn me about what he'd witnessed. About what humanity is becoming while beings wiser than us watch from the shadows, too afraid to reveal themselves because they've seen what we do to the different, the unknown, the vulnerable. I kept his secret while he lived because that's what love demanded. I'm breaking it now because that's what his legacy demands. Not proof of his existence, but testimony to what his existence meant. We're not alone in these forests, in this world. But we've made it so that every other conscious being has learned to fear us, to hide from us, to watch us from afar, and shake their heads at what we've become. Walker would want me to say this: you're being watched. Your actions are being recorded by witnesses you'll never see. And when they look at humanity, what they see fills them with such profound sadness and terror that they choose invisibility over contact. Maybe that should terrify us more than any monster in the woods ever could. I loved him. I miss him. And I hope, God, I hope that somewhere in those mountains others like him still exist, still watch, still keep their own records of humanity's choices. Because someone should witness, someone should remember, and someone should hold us accountable for what we've become. Walker did that for 47 years. The least I can do is tell his story before dementia steals even that from me. His name was Walker. He was real. He was my friend. And humanity should be grateful there are still secrets in these forests, because the fact that beings like him choose to remain hidden tells you everything you need to know about what they've learned by watching us. Thank you, Walker, for everything, for 47 years of friendship, for teaching me that love transcends species, for trying to warn me about what you'd seen. I hope I understood. I hope I'm doing right by you. And I hope, wherever others like you are hiding, they see this story and know that at least one human tried to be worthy of being known. That's all any of us can ask for, isn't it? To be seen, to be known, to be loved for exactly what we are. Walker was seen, he was known, and he was deeply, profoundly loved. I hope he knew that, I hope he understood, and I hope the watchers in the forest know it too.